carrying on the conversation around Luis Arraez, the Marlins have every option available to them at this point. We talked on yesterday's episode heavily around the extension cost associated with Luis Arraez, whether they should do it. If they aren't to do it, what are the other options? Well, there's a trade. When would they look to do that? Equally, the Marlins just see 2 years of Luis Arraez and then extend the qualifying offer. Which direction will they go? This is Locked On Marlins.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked On Marlins, your daily Marlins podcast. I am your host, Peter Pratt. Hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Miami Marlins_UK. If you're listening to the pod, of course, hit subscribe. It's your team every day. And thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. It is Wednesday, the 20th of December. It's touching distance of Christmas. Hopefully everyone has got their presents organized. I know I haven't. I'm running a little bit behind, but nevertheless, I will get there. But I hope everyone is looking forward to Christmas. Locked On Marlins has got you covered right up to Christmas, and there will be a Christmas Day episode. As always, guest to be confirmed. But if you are a regular listener to this pod, you will know who has been the guest the last 2 Christmas days. So if you were to hedge, I would hedge in that way. Nevertheless, there is a YouTube channel as well, guys. Make sure you hit subscribe over there too. That is called Locked On Marlins, and it is Wednesday. And the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett, is back in the house. SB, how we doing?
Yeah, not too bad, Pete. Went too long, so I had to come back.
Went too long, baby.
Works out well for me, doesn't it?
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Before we get into it, and there's tons to get into here as well, but this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150. If your team wins, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And for the everydayers, the guys that join us every single day, and they're in the comments on YouTube as well, or on Twitter, engaging. I appreciate every single one of you guys. You'd have listened to yesterday's episode. You'd have heard the conversation. Me and Sean, well, we spent 25 minutes plus talking about extension situations for Luis Arraez, because fundamentally, as Marlins fans, we've done the hard work. We've acquired a guy that's just an absolute stud. He's so important to this offense. He's only got 2 years of team control remaining. And we're kind of looking at him thinking, we could really do with Luis Arraez beyond the 2 years. Hence the conversation, the discussion. I think where we landed, just to summarize it, if you haven't listened back, I'll summarize it pretty quickly. We think that there would be if you're going to buy him out of arbitration now, 2 years of arb plus maybe 4 years of free agency years at $25 million per annum there on those free agent years. A 6-year, $130 million-ish kind of contract. Are the Marlins going to go there? It's possible because there's money coming off the books with Avisel Garcia and Josh Bell. You can replace money with new money, better money. And for me, that feels like a solid approach. Sean, if the Marlins aren't going to look to do that and they feel that after 2 years' time, $25 million for Luis Arraez, and let's just call it out, the roster, the total cost of their big league roster will probably remain in and around the $100 million mark. $25 million for Luis Arraez, that's 25% of your payroll, total payroll. Sandy Alcantara also, it's $17 million-ish. It's a lot of money on those two guys. They are the studs. But could that be seen as being too much budget allocation to 2 guys? And thus maybe the Marlins may need to decide on, is it Sandy or is it Arraez? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think when Arraez first came to the Marlins, I think it was a case of now or never as far as an extension in my mind.
Before last year, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
before,
okay,
good point. Like they did with Pablo, like Minnesota did. I think it's a case of, if you put a gun to my head every single day, which would be a horrible thing to do, but if you were to do that, Pete, and ask me the question, at this point, do you expect a Luis Arraez extension at any point during his Marlins tenure? The answer would be no.
Oh boy.
Just because that's not something that I'm used to seeing the Marlins do. Like the money, free agency money is not something you see a lot with the Marlins. So I think extension for me always seemed unlikely as soon as it didn't happen. And as I said yesterday, I can slightly convince myself that there's an avenue for it to be possible for the Marlins under the structure that they work with. But even still, as I said, I would be highly doubtful that happened. I certainly wouldn't be hoping for it because the Marlins have dashed my hopes enough for me to hope on something so unlikely.
All right, so we got three scenarios. I don't want you to spoil the other ones because we're going to talk about them shortly. But from an extension perspective, 100% available, 3 scenarios available. What percentage are you attributing to an extension for Luis Arraez from the Marlins of a total 100% possibility?
10%.
10% for an extension. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Okay. Let's segue it. Let's talk about one of the other options because I think we've talked enough extension. And I completely get where your head's at. And the thing you've called out there, we didn't talk on yesterday's episode. And I must say, we should have done. And what you've called out is bang on. That actually, the time was earlier. They didn't need to wait and see if he was going to be the batting champ again. They needed to take a chance at that point. Take a chance that he was going to be, but try to buy low almost on that one if they could have done. I don't know. Maybe that wasn't possible, but let's talk about release or free agency. I want to talk about that one because this is one of the opportunities here for the Marlins in that they just have Luis Arraez that just plays out his contract. The 2 years of club control that remain, let's just project 12 million, 16 million for Luis Arraez. There's then a qualifying offer that they can make at the back end of that. So they could do that. They could, Arraez could accept that. You mentioned yesterday that the feeling would be is like with Sandy gone this year and it's a growth year in 24, maybe they look to prioritize 25. And that being said, that would then maybe lean to the fact that the Marlins would retain Arraez through 25, at least through to the deadline, potentially, Sean, here, in my opinion, where you'd get to the deadline and see where you're at. And in 25, Sandy's back, you've got Arraez going, you make some decisions. Is that a situation you could see playing out, or are the Marlins playing with fire on that one with Luis Arraez and his value?
It's risky. It really is risky. And normally I wouldn't even entertain this. But when we get to percentages later, I'm higher than I think I would normally be, simply because that Sandy window has been something that I've talked about for years since the contract was signed.
Yeah.
And to me, it is a case of if they don't compete with Sandy and Arraez on the team, moving Arraez keeping Arraez through to the draft pick compensation, that value, that pick that you're going to get, the guy's not even going to be in high A, even double A by the time Sandy's contract is over. So it's a real risk. So it is a case of, do you keep Arraez through 25 without a contract extension on the hope of competing for 2025, knowing that you're also hamstringing yourself some of that value for the remaining 2 years of Sandy, if Sandy's still with the Marlins in those final 2 years, of course.
Well, that's another question for another day. We keep kind of teasing that one out somehow. And I think it's relevant to call out, but he's missing in 24. He then has 2 years guaranteed with the Marlins, in theory anyway. It's 17 a year, and then a club option of 21 million in 2027. So there's still plenty of control that the Marlins hold over Sandy, but we'll wait to see. 17 million heading into 21 million. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money for the Marlins for an arm that is pitching 30 times a season or whatever the number may be. Wait to see. I want to carry on this conversation here, though, Sean, around how the Marlins play this, because I think this is a really intriguing one, to be honest with you. Like, I can absolutely see this situation where they just let it ride. They just think, "Do you know what? 24 will be what it'll be. 25, if Sandy's back and good, Luzardo, let's say he's still around, he's back, Yuri Perez, Eddie, like, let's say they just, 24, they just say, listen, let's just, defer moves. It's a deferral year. Make some minor moves, but really we're thinking about 25. And so with that, they make limited moves in 24, and we roll into 25 with pretty much the same kind of roster. Hopefully you can move on from Avi at that point. Or maybe Avi returns. Who knows? Josh Bell's gone. May need to make a decision at first. But I'm really intrigued to see on this one. So we'll carry on that. But before we do that, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Yes, sir. And guys, you can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app, well, it's super easy to use and has a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, guys, you're back here with me, Peter Pratt, and the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett, on Wednesday, the 20th of December. We are talking Luis Arraez. We talked extensions. We are now talking just playing out this contract, 2 years of control with the Marlins and maybe a qualifying offer that could be accepted. I'm really intrigued on this one. I can see a significant situation here, Sean. So actually, let me just ask you, what's your percentage here? You had 10% for an extension. What about just 2 years, just the Marlins play it out and extend a qualifying offer? What's your percentage here for this one?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, it is, and I think that I am higher on that simply because I'm looking at the way the team is constructed. I'm looking at the way the contracts are, and I am so laser focused right now on 2025 as far as being an quote all-in season that I think that the Marlins do potentially consider rolling with it, seeing what they got in 2024, making that decision. There's going to be some growth from some people, and there'll be some setbacks for others. So it is a case of let's see how this season goes. And then if we are ready to go all in 2025, then they'll just roll with it. I think you could argue that any kind of extension would be very easily tradable. But ultimately, I would put the rolling into 2025, knowing that you're going to lose them at the end of the year. You're probably going to go into some sort of rebuild, whether that's a full blow up or not. That draft pick that they would get from the qualifying offer would absolutely have some value. So I've got it about 25%.
Does feel like it's almost 25 or bust in some ways, like the way things are going. I mean, I guess like you've got, in theory, Jazz and Jesus Luzardo into 26 plus Sandy, plus most of the rest of the roster as well. I guess the interesting part for this next year will be obviously the expiring contracts of Bell, Tanner Scott as well. It's a really intriguing one. Like, is Tanner Scott for real? I mean, not the segue is off into Tanner Scott, but like, can he repeat that year? Like, it's one of those where you look at Luis Arraez's numbers and you just feel so confident that it's repeatable, a significantly repeatable skill. I look at Tanner Scott and it's fair to say there's some volatility in those years he's had with the Marlins. And so I'm not sure what Tanner Scott will get, frankly, but those guys, I think the business model does say that, if the Marlins aren't in, and this will segue us to it, Sean, talking about trades, but like if the Marlins aren't in it in 24, like they'll give themselves a chance, right? Like if Jazz is on the field, 150 games, Berger, Bell, Arraez, Jazz, DLC, Jesus Sanchez, whoever's at shortstop, like, it's okay as an offense. Clearly, it's more about the pitching for the Marlins and can the bullpen do its thing. Like, it's pretty much 23 just told into 24. So we'll see what happens. But, like, gut feel is they were extremely lucky. They won a lot of close games last year. There's a good chance that, like, they're going to maybe not take a step forward. Thus, maybe Josh Bell will be available. Thus, Tanner Scott will be available. And that's the business model now, right? Where you have to move those guys. You have to. And that's going to be an interesting thing headed into 25 too with Luis Arraez. Is like, if they go all in for 25 and they're not in it, then you have to move Luis Arraez at the deadline as well, I guess, right? If you haven't been able to extend him. So I think this is going to be so intriguing. I'm with you though, Sean, here, that I can see like 25 being the beacon. You build for 25. And thus you defer on some of these decisions, maybe. Or maybe you just look to move Arraez now, make a huge blockbuster and just reset everything. I don't know. I mean, one question I've got as well, and this was me talking to myself a few days ago, which is never good. Or it can be good, but sometimes not. I was trying to work out, like, what's Luis Arraez's market? Like, what teams are legitimately interested in a Luis Arraez at this point and would want to build around Luis Arraez? I think that's a really interesting question, considering like where some of these big teams are and the where a lot of teams are at second base in particular. It feels like there's like a glut of talent there. And I'm interested if the Marlins do look to try to trade Arraez at this point, like what his market would be and if the Marlins actually would realize full value. Where's your head at on that one?
I think ultimately it's going to be difficult to single one out right now. But as far as market goes, I think he absolutely will have that market for pretty much anybody that's not currently secure at second base. But it is a case of, there are some of the bigger teams out there have got a lot of money committed to their second baseman already. We've already discussed the fact that Rice might be better off at first base if you can make that work. There are some teams out there, Texas, for example, they've got a power hitting second baseman already. So whether or not they would pencil that into first base and have a contact guy there instead, it's complicated. But I think Arraez ultimately, any team out there that's looking for a quality bat, 20 million a year is chump change to them, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. So you've got 10% that he's extended, and that's at 30 million. Sorry, that's at 6 years, 130 million. You've then got 25% that the contract tolls and they just see what happens, and he's not moved. Qualifying offer, see what happens. So that leaves us, 65% he's traded. The question then, Sean, is at what point, what juncture is he going to be traded, in your opinion?
I think the most logical step is a deadline in 25 if things haven't worked out. I think the next logical one is actually right now.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that doesn't happen, because to me, the Marlins getting in, if they're going to do it in the sense of they're going to get a couple of prospects that are close to the majors, how much value are they going to give you in 25? Who knows? I mean, I'm kind of not overly positive about the Marlins with prospects at the moment, but that's been earned over the last 10 years.
Correct.
So it's problematic. It's for me as a fan only to see a trade of him right now. Also, I love watching him play baseball. So I don't want to be. I don't want those 2 years stolen from me. But I think the Marlins, if they're not competitive in 2025, which obviously, again, I hope they are, but if for any reason they're not, trading him at the deadline, to me, would give them far more of a return value-wise than the qualifying offer draft pick compensation.
100%. I think it's absolutely nailed on. So I'm with you. For me, there's two obvious windows for Luis Arraez. It's deadline 25 if things go awry. But I'm in lockstep with you here that 25 clearly is their better chance of winning because it links heavily to Sandy and his availability. So with that being said, the question right now, and this is where my head's at, is do you move Arraez now if there's someone, a suitor that really wants him, values him? Do you move him now and acquire guys that will help you in 25 also? They may not be quite ready now. It may be guys that are like approaching, or they maybe got minimal service time. It'd probably be a package of a couple, maybe. I don't know. But could you maybe think, listen, we're going to move Arraez. We can't extend him. We're going to move him now, but we think we can get two guys back whatever those guys may be, that we think can actually help us in 25 specifically. Sandy's back as well, and we just roll with it. We've got a replacement for Arraez. We think we can kind of mix and match Xavier Edwards and John Birdie and other guys that are on the 40-man, whatever it might be, and pull the trigger now. Because to your point, if they think that 25 is the year, then maybe now is the right time to pull the trigger on a Arraez deal. So we got 65% here, Sean.
Yeah.
What's your waiting here on a 2023, like a now off-season deal, if they're going to trade him? How is that more or less likely than the deadline in 25?
I think it probably is, for the reasons you've just explained, more likely. I'd probably put it at 40% for right now. I think 2024, in my mind, I think the team will still be competitive. I still think there's enough value there that they'll win high 70s, maybe even low 80 wins. But that might just be the spring training positivity in me coming out far too early, because right now, December and January, I'm usually quite morose with my opinions, which you may have heard over the last couple of days.
Oh, baby. Good word, by the way.
But yeah, I think a trade now makes some sense, because if they are going to try and compete in 2025, you're right, they get a couple of pieces. Maybe that money also, if you're going to be bringing in guys that are pre-ARB or very early ARB, that's 16 million saved for 2025 as well, which you can put a bit of money in. I mean, is there an avenue to chuck Avisal Garcia onto that deal as well and move even more money? Who knows? But yeah, I think, to me, the most logical thing that's going to happen is they're going to run into 2025, give it a shot, and then if it doesn't work out, he'll be traded.
Yeah,
and that's probably the second point of the deal. But I think now is just as likely. I'd say 40% now, 40% at that deadline, and 20% next off season.
Yeah, I just wonder, like, how much trade capital is lost by moving Arraez now versus moving him at 25 deadline. Like, whenever you're at the deadline and you're in it and you're acquiring all-star, stud hitters, like, those teams are in it and they're willing to often overpay as well. And so I'm interested to work out, like, how much diminished value is there actually in terms of return. Clearly, it kind of depends what you want too. Like, it's hard to sell Arraez at the deadline in 25 and acquire big league talent back. It's kind of the problem with those deals. Like, you can only acquire back prospects because the teams acquiring aren't going to subtract from their roster. Whereas right now, in the offseason, teams have an ability to actually, make that type of move. Move big league for big league like we've seen. But I feel like at deadlines, it's not going to happen. And thus, if the Marlins sell Arraez in the 25 deadline, they're going to be acquiring prospects that are like nowhere near big league ready. And thus, you effectively then enter the rebuild phase. So this is so precarious, Sean, to be honest with you. Like, Arraez, generally, it's really precarious, and actually is heavily linked to, like, the overall strategy, I think, of, like, the roster itself. Like, how they handle Arraez effectively gives us the indication of what the strategy is. Like, at this point, I don't know about you, Sean, but I'm feeling a little bit uncertain. Like, I don't quite know the direction of travel. We hear from Craig, he's saying, I can see a move, and I think it's to restock the farm, which says to me, that to me saying rebuild. Is that saying the same to you?
To a certain degree, I think restocking it can have two different ways. You're either doing that full rebuild, full restock, or just adding some pieces. I think there is a way to do that without going all in on a rebuild. But I think what you just said is exactly where my mind was with Arraez trading him now. Trading him now, you're trading for potentially a guy that's on the 26-man roster of another team. It's for sure the 40-man roster, with maybe a bit of time up at the big leagues, shown a little bit. And you're taking in a guy that you're going to have as your everyday second baseman for the foreseeable future through the whole of the Sandy window, at cost control as well. And if they trade him in 2025, it's going to be a prospect haul, and it's going to be full send on that rebuild. Sandy's gone. Anybody else with value's gone. Some of the younger pitchers like Luzardo and Erie and whoever else might grow into their roles. Eddie potentially, if he can do a Tanner Scott style fix on his walks, like there's still a rotation there to go through the rebuild. I mean, the rebuild that you went through as your beginning of a fanship for the Marlins was atrocious. Like losing God knows 100 losses multiple times. I think that the next big rebuild for the Marlins actually won't be that disastrous.
No, I'm in agreement on that. I think they're definitely in a much better position from a pitching perspective. I think that's the crux of it, right? Is like the pitching conveyor belt and the talent development is so much more effective. And you look at the minor league system right now, and the problem is it's bereft of like offensive tools pretty much, but like there's still a couple of arms in there that you're getting excited about in 2 to 3 years time. So I'm with you. I think the pitching's the hardest to do, and that's the interesting bit about this whole Marlins rebuild is like the pitching is the hardest to get and hardest to achieve. The Marlins have achieved that, and it feels like they've been sometimes a bit too passive on the offensive side in terms of what they've tried to do, who they've acquired, and the types of guys they've built around to fundamentally. Kim Ang, I'd say, significantly adjusted that in the last year or two of her, I would say, full ownership. Like you could see there was a massive shift in the type of profile that Kim Ang valued. Maybe Skip Schumacher too, but for me, that was Kim driving that ship. And it worked. We have to look back and say it worked. The problem they now face is there's no Sandy and the budget is blown. And it feels like there needs to be a sacrificial lamb. I'm just trying to work out who that sacrificial lamb is going to be, Sean, to be honest with you. Is it Luis Arraez? Is it Sandy Alcantara? Is it Jesus Luzardo? For me, those are the three obvious ones. The other question is like Josh Bell. I keep looking at that one and saying 16.5. He kind of opted in. Maybe the Marlins didn't really want him to opt in. I do look at that number and think 16.5 for Josh Bell is sizable and does really limit what the Marlins can do this offseason too. So I've got my eye on that one too. Overall, let's just kind of go with our gut feel. Let's summarize what we think will happen in the end, Sean. We've got three possibilities here: trade, extend, or he plays out the contract. Give me what you think will happen. I know there's like probabilities, but what do you think actually happens here with Luis Arraez and the Marlins?
I think that the Marlins keep hold of Arraez into the 2025 season and either trade him at the deadline or they hold on to him. I know I only put it at a low number, but once you go into 2025 and you've not dealt him at the deadline because you're competing, the only other option in my mind is to take that draft pick compensation, because I just don't see a way that even then they try and extend him.
Makes a ton of sense. I'm really torn on this one. They could go in so many different directions. The business model says to me that Luis Arraez should be traded almost immediately, to be honest with you. That's just like, what I just think, what would the Rays do? And the Rays wouldn't give a crap about Rays Twitter kicking off. Can't trade Arraez. I'm never going to watch a team again if you trade Arraez. Rays do not care. They never do, because there's no need for them to care. They're all about wins and losses. We're a little bit early for that at this point. Like, you can't move Arraez and go, hey, well, we're going to win 90 games anyway, so it doesn't matter. That is not the case with the Marlins at this point. So they're in such a precarious position. I look at Luis Arraez offensively. I go back to yesterday's episode, Sean. He's the type of guy you want to build around. He's just, his floor is so high. The ceiling may not be high, super high, not as high as other guys, but the floor is super high with Luis Arraez. A guy hitting over 300 in the leadoff spot or two spot that can give you, 150 games worth of work. A guy that everyone loves, culture, off the field. Like, there's so much value there for the Marlins. And really, I honestly think they need to consider how they can keep him around. And can they find a way to get it done? But what I'd like to see them do, this is the main thing for me, is I'd like to see them take the initiative on that. What frustrated me the most about Starling Marte, for example, was you've done the hard work. You fleeced the Diamondbacks at that point for Starling Marte. Absolute stud, but they were so passive with Starling Marte. And there was a deal to be done. I want the Marlins to be aggressive with Luis Arraez. I want them to be on the front foot. I want them to be knocking down Luis Arraez's door. Let's get a deal done here, Luis. We love you here. We want to build around you. Let's get a deal done. Let's not make it 130 million. Let's make it under 100, but let's get a deal done. And let's see if we can. I feel like that's the challenge now. Can you sell the Marlins to Luis Arraez and get him to commit? Does he want to be here? I feel like that's the question. If they can sell it to him, get a deal done, then you pull the trigger, you extend him, and you get him to commit for 6 years. And you just build around Luis Arraez, and you plug him in. You know you got a guy hitting 350, 330, 310. I don't know, whatever the number is. But the Marlins have someone that they can build around. And the fans have someone they can connect with and they love. There's a lot of value in that. Any final thoughts here, Sean, or are we getting out of here?
Only negativity, so we'll move on.
Oh, boy. I've come full circle here, though. It's so tough because the business model to me says you should move him. But I look at the impact he's had and what the Marlins were just like crying out for. Like, this was the guy in the profile that we cried out for years after years of Brinsons and Monte Harrisons and Isan Diaz's. No contact, strikeouts galore, you name it. This was the anti-Isan Diaz. And, I mean, the Marlins, they were the 5th best team in the NL last year. They got bounced by the Phils, but it is what it is. But 5th best team in the NL, Luis Arraez was a huge part of that. Huge part of it. They need to extend him. They really do. I don't think 130 million over 6 is the number they can go to, though. So they need to do a sales job on Arraez and be aggressive. They can't be passive and let it get to the final trade window and finally just throw out a number and hope. It won't work. I have to do it now. Guys, let me know in the comments on YouTube what you think. Let me know how you think this can go. Trade, extend, release, or plays out his contract, however you want to go about it. I think Sean thinks he's going to be traded in the end. I think he could be extended, but the business model said he should probably be traded too. So many factors going on here. So many factors. It's so hard to work out how this is going to play out. But let me know your thoughts in the comments on YouTube, guys. Or on Twitter as well, of course. Guys, that's been Locked On Marlins for Wednesday, the 20th of December. I firstly thank you for joining me and making Locked On Marlins your first listen. Equally, I thank the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett, for a double episode week. As always, I thought the insight and opinion was on the money, as always. Guys, I'll be back tomorrow. No idea what I'm talking about yet, though, but I will be back, and I look forward to seeing you then.